Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for joining the session unpacking the challenges with regard to South Africa's rail policy. Colleagues, a little over a year and a month ago, 12th of May 2022, the then Honourable Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, published the white paper on national rail policy. If I recall correctly, it was Government Gazette Notice 2077, published in Government Gazette 46356. And so, if we cast our minds back to a year and a month ago, we find ourselves confronted with a policy or a white paper that, as one would imagine, provides the problem statements that articulates very comprehensively the issues we face. It also introduces the solutions and what needs to be done. However, as one would imagine, for those fellow compliance and legal experts in the room, a white paper doesn't reveal all the detail. To unpack the detail further, we do have a very illustrious panel that will talk us through the next steps and what needs to be done in this regard. Operation Vuledzani determines that the country's mining industries and mineral resources are located at the center of the country, very far away from the coastline. And as one would imagine, the imperative aspect of developing a corridor management strategy becomes all the more important, so that we strengthen the logistics network to allow the distribution of goods from producer to end consumer. And ultimately, the distribution network is the core of a supply chain. On that note, our panel discussion today will not only focus on the challenges that impact SA Inc., but rather focus on implementable solutions that we as a collective can take forward. I'm sure many of you in this room would agree that there are various government departments that work on a specific project. And these government departments need to work in alignment and in synchronicity with each other. As an example, we have the Department of Transport, you've got the Department of Public Enterprises, you've got the Department of Labour. And what you need to do is allow these departments, as business, you need to show these departments that a coordinated approach is the only approach. And what better way to do it and make history today at the 45th annual edition of SAPICS in partnership with SARF as the apex voice of the supply chain. Our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Unita Maria, reminded us this morning that there is a shared responsibility, there is a shared maintenance, there is a shared network, and there's a shared infrastructure. And underpinning the shared responsibility, infrastructure, and network is the important concept of service reliability. In order for supply chains to be optimized, you have to have service reliability unparalleled. On that note, colleagues, it is indeed my esteemed honor and privilege to introduce our first panelist for this morning, a decorated academic with vast experience in the field of rail policy development, also serving under the then cabinet of Minister Mac Maraj, who, might I add, I think in 1996, Prof, if memory serves me correctly, you introduced various concepts that, if implemented at the time, would have taken the then Spoornet, now Transnet, to a very different reality. And today's panel discussion, indeed, would have a very different setting. Be that as it may, a new tomorrow has indeed begun. So, Prof. Havenga, I hand over to you to talk us through the next steps.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I need the slideshow. I only have 5 slides. So, and here it is. I just want to go back. This specific picture, I've used it so many times, so maybe 90% of you have seen it. I'm just going to repeat it again as one of 5 slides. That is talking about our country, about South Africa. And Devlyn has talked about it just now when he talked about inland transport distances. We have a difficult country in many respects. All our factors of production, all the people that live here, a lot of the people that live here, a lot of our industries is in the middle of the country. And it's a very large country as it is. We are endowed with the fact that there's 2 major corridors, which makes it easier for us in terms of that. But if you take South Africa and you superimpose it on Europe, you see something, and I got really cross the other day from somebody from Switzerland. It's got a GDP 3 times our size, and it's a small little country. Logistics is actually so easy, if you think about it. For us, it's hard. It's the size of France and Germany. But if you compare us to France and Germany, those economies is 18 times bigger than us. So we have to distribute our economy of the same size as France and Germany over this massive country. It tells us one thing. It tells us that logistics is critically important for survival. It is one of the most important inputs into our society. And I keep on saying this, and I'll say it again, that 58% of the average value of any commodity in South Africa is logistics. Everything. I include labor, I include everything else. 58% is logistics. And if for some of them it doesn't make sense, most of you probably will, please come and talk to me. It is that much. Yet it does not get that much attention. Yet it takes 15 years to get a rail policy passed. Yet after moving South Africa in 1998, we have no significant progress in terms of logistics policy in this country, except for the rail policy. Yet. We don't see this as the massive and important input into our production system that we currently see. If you think about it, the GDP of the world we are 0.4% of the GDP of the world, but 1.2% of the world ton kilometers happens in South Africa. 2% of the world, we are 2% of the world rail network, but 0.4% of the GDP. We have this massive rail network. I know it's narrow gauge, but we're not using it at all. And if you think about something like dry bulk cargo, more than 5% of the world's dry bulk cargo touches South Africa. Look at the size of our GDP. We are a transport, logistics, supply chain intensive country. And leadership in this country tended to ignore it all the time. All the time. I think that is changing now, which I'm very happy with. So why did we do this on the supply side? This is, if you compare rail market share over the years, we obviously all know what has happened. But it already talks to us, if you think about history, history often talks to us a lesson. If you look at the red line, isn't it a bit funny? Why is the red line like that? Because the government of the time wanted to transport agricultural products over a large network that we didn't need for free, more or less, because they were the constituents of the government at that time. And we started with the process of cross-subsidization, which in all its ways and all its means has actually killed our transport system in this country. You can't cross-subsidize. You must make things work the way that should work. If you think about it like this, the black line there is our locomotive fleet. The dotted line, black line, is our GDP. You can see how we've invested in the road. That is what we've done as a country. Recently, we made a lot of other mistakes, make no mistake. But as a country, we have invested in the road. That's what we've done. In spite of the fact that we have this massive corridors that can carry a lot of rail economic freight, but we just didn't do it. In fact, if we go back, we started our railway in South Africa in 1860. This is from 1875 up to today, the route network. Basically how it's grown over time. This is the export lines that we built in we built it before that, but we commissioned them in 1976. But what has happened with that? That is our ton kilometers over this GFB line, and this is the ton kilometers over the export lines. We've used the one to hide the problems of the other. It's very simple. Once again, cross-subsidization. That is what we've done. You do it for a while, eventually, what happens, the whole thing starts spiraling down. But you can see in terms of GFB there. And that is what happens. So with that, the network, it is too big. It's as simple as that. It's just too big. And that is why we crashed general freight in this country. We just crashed it. That's why I say that we have the lowest volumes of general freight today than we had since the Second World War. So basically it's that. It's also why the export lines begins to fail eventually, because you can't keep on cross-subsidization, because then you don't maintain them well enough anymore. Eventually you begin to run into technical problems. Eventually some other problems occur, and eventually they also crash and the whole system will crash down around you. It's as simple as that. One way of looking at the most important way is a way that I call density. Density talks about the ton kilometers per route kilometer. So it talks about the efficiency of your fixed asset. The further you go towards the right on this graph, the more efficient, cost-effective, and working well your railway becomes. Because then you have massive amounts of ton kilometers over the same kilometer of route. That is where you make money. That's basically with a fixed cost business, this is how it works. This is where we were in 1928 as a country. This is where we were in 1976 for general freight. That stage we did not have export lines. That is where we were 3 years ago, and this is where we are today. We are just basically falling apart as such. As a railway, we are falling apart. There's no other way of saying it. This is where America was in 1928, and this is where America is today. It's as simple as that. That's a simple solution if you look at it. By the way, out of interstate, this is where the iron ore line were 3 years ago, and this is where it's now. This is where the coal line were 3 years ago, and this is where it's now. You're just creeping up in the wrong direction as well. What do you need for global best practice? You need to be better than 10. So part of what we do in Operation Vuledzani, Rudy referred to on one of his slides, we're going to classify this network, we're going to work out how it should look like, and we can look like how we can move this network and its various pieces to the right of that line. That's it. There's no other way of doing it. Move it to the right of that line without cross-subsidization, without pieces lying at the left that's going to be subsidized by pieces that's hanging on the right. Simple as that. We've done the calculations, we've done the sum, and we're going to get it done, and I think there's backing to get it done. There was a guy called Andrew Mossé, he often said, but rail is a dying industry. No, it's a dying industry. Well, we work with the United Union of Railroads, we work with the International Transport Forum, we know all ton kilometers in the world, and we're falling behind. I haven't got a 2022 figure yet, but I guess it's about 1.181. So it's grown by 81% over the last 2 decades. Our railway has grown by 9% over the last 2 decades. So we know this, and if you come to the more last 3 decades, we know that basically it's, as I say, it's crashing. The green line is the railway, blue is road. We can see the export lines now more clearly, what has been happening. Coal figures, the lowest since 1993 in terms of coal. We can see that. We know what is missing, a massive amount, 72 billion ton kilometers that's missing. That should have been on rail, but it isn't. And how do we fix it, or where should we have fixed it? Well, it started with, in the 1980s, we realized what was going on. Wim de Villiers brought out his famous report that wanted to restructure the railway with some really terrible mistakes in it, not understanding that we need to invest in the core corridors next to road when deregulation happened. We then had the legal succession of Transnet. What did we actually try to do? And this is important if we think about what we want to do today. The railways before 1990, and I was there, I joined them in 1979, was a cost center. The whole railway was a cost center for South Africa. Once a year, what happened? They calculated how much was needed for maintenance, everything, blue chip maintenance. Every year they calculate what will the whole system cost. They divided that by tariffs. They cross-subsidized where they wanted to. For instance, if you had very expensive stuff, they charged you more and they gave it to the farmers. And this cost center land like this, and nobody was worried about it. Except in 1989, we deregulated transport in this country, and we couldn't run it as a cost center anymore. Therefore, we had to change it into a profit center, meaning we needed this. A leaner and well-funded network, a domestic intermodal system to run next to the core corridors, a view of corridors, and a supply chain view of a railway that we need to insert in that. Okay, so in 30 years, we didn't do that. So let's just turn around, we didn't do this. We made a lot of other mistakes, but those 4 things we didn't do. It's as simple as that, we just didn't do it. So we are now, my last slide, what I call the last throw of the dice. We took 15 years to get a rail policy. I commented that from the first one that was published all the way back to 1987, the first position paper. A lot of it was like really not useful. Today we have a useful rail policy, but it requires certain things. I mentioned 6, a fully constituted regulator, a rail master plan that we know what we're going to do, and an act. We need to fund and rehabilitate our network, that it looks like Sunrail. I call it Suntrack. An independent IM. I had a discussion this morning with somebody about it that still believes that the IM will be part of Transnet. I'm very happy about what Rudy said in the earlier session. An independent IM. There's no other way of looking at it. And then a funded and operational private sector. So we must not forget, in order to get this to work, we need people like Grindrod and Traction and who else to run trains. And we must make it possible for them to run trains. They cannot go out there and get funding for locomotives and rolling stock, set up businesses and so on while we're dawdling around. They need to go to funders and put things together to do this. So we must keep our eye on them in terms of also maybe like a fleet management company, etc. Where are we? The DOT is working on the first 3. They once told me early next year they will have it in place. I give it another 18 months, which means we can't back on that saving us right now. It still needs to happen. The network rehabilitation and funding, how will it be done? Where will we get the money? And how will the channels work in terms of getting it? And all of this means Transnet needs to be restructured. It's just, you can look at it and see Transnet will have to look different. And then my last question is, when will trains run again? We can't wait for another 18 months or 6 months or 3 months to do it. So I'm looking at Ian and the people who's promised us that in the next few weeks they're going to get the trains running again. Because that we also need to do right now, immediately. So for me, where are we now? This is where we are. And Ian, right when we knew the LCC is going to happen, I know you and I had a phone call and we said, this is actually not 2 things, it's 1 thing. We're going to work together and we're going to make this work. It's important. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think what Prof has revealed today is that there is a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. And sometimes all you need is to find that match is the light. Prof, you have provided the light, and I think all of us have found the match in the room. President Ramaphosa said in his State of the Nation address in 2021 that government does not create jobs. Instead, businesses create jobs. Government create the environment for businesses to create jobs. And on that note, we can see for the first time, this is again the historic collaboration, but for the first time, government and organized business are working together in congruency, not in divergence, toward a common objective. And I think the umbrella of Operation Vuledzani and the vehicle of the National Logistics Crisis Committee is the change that SA Inc. needs. The one commonality that unites each of us seated in this room and on stage is that we all work for SA Inc. We have a country to protect, we have an economy to sustain, and we have the accountability as leaders to the future generation. Ons moet die volgende generasie voorberei om die leiders van môre te word. We must prepare the future generation to be the leaders of tomorrow. And I think, Prof, you've said it all today in your presentation. You've not just given us the insights, but also the next steps. And the next steps are in motion. Mkhulisi, an esteemed former CEO, has come out of retirement alongside Ian Bird and esteemed leaders under B4SA and BUSA to make this a reality. This is not the dream team, this is the realization team. A new reality has begun. On that note, from a decorated academic to a passionate advocate for third-party rail access and private sector participation, an esteemed blend of both business and academia, and also a lawyer at that, might I add. I need to be careful of what I'm going to say next. But it is indeed my esteemed honor and privilege to invite our second panelist, the Chief Executive Officer of the African Rail Industry Association and a Chief Visionary Officer as well, aligning to today's theme, forward thinking for supply chains. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause for Mesela Kope Nhlapo.
Good morning. Is it still morning? It doesn't matter. Somewhere else in the world is morning. He said I'm Mesela Nhlapo. I like to correct that, Kope Nhlapo. You know, when we get married, they pay lower for us. You know, sometimes we wish we can refund this money. And people can start cleaning after themselves. I'm a complicated individual, and it's from where I started my career. I was a quality control manager for a galvanizing plant responsible for about 18 African men. It's important to underline that. And being in that space, engineering space, of which I was not trained for brought in a different type of thinking. that 1 + 1 is not 2. There's always, we put a 10% contingency to my first proper engineering work, where we build a loading facility of fly ash from the Eskom side at Kendal Power Station to the silo that we have built, and to understand that that pneumatic conveying, it has to be at 6% because of this reason, the pressure that needs to go in. I mean, those are things that makes one to understand how to run a complex company such as Transnet, any state-owned employees. But South Africans, being South Africans and being who we are, we go big or we go home. Longest trains, deepest mine, a gold mine, and we go big. And when we fail, we go big as well. And when with the railway sector, water, electricity, but that, for me, it has always been the rebirth of South Africa, where during apartheid, I was not born yet, a Boer-Maka plan was coined. And this is where we are as a nation, that yes, we know that something is wrong. Yes, we see it. But what are we doing about it? Are we going to do braaivleis? I don't eat meat anymore. I'm busy working. I am busy working in the best interest of South Africa. I have only one passport. We talk about 15 years, Prof, and 15 years it will be a teenager that has now become rebellious, and you have no choice but to implement it, to bring to life that policy. So it's not by chance, it's a rebellious a teenager that forced us to be where we are, the first rail policy in 80 years. One of my favorite ministers is Minister Mbalula. I know you're all going to smile and go like, yeah, right. He had the energy to push for this rail policy. And when he did not know or understand what you were saying, he will take you to the president and say, tell the president what you were telling me. And that's how things worked at DOT. The only problem is that he made people to be in the trains at 4 a.m. because he had so much energy and passion. And when he does something, he owns it. And the train tracks ended up on his suit one day, and everybody was sending me that picture. So, but we need to recognize where government does well and where as the public, we need to come in. We are in a crisis. What are we going to do? The challenges that are facing the policy is human beings. It's not the policy itself. A JD from DOT has said that the policy is not perfect, but let's look at it as a donkey on steroids. It's not like we don't have anything. And with 2017, now the teenager, and prior to that, the African Union, thinking that South Africa is God's gift to the world, they said that we, as South Africa, will champion the manufacturing of rail rolling stock. But unfortunately, we're sleeping on the wheel. But we're going to change that because the new bosses are in town. I'm not a CEO. I'm not a chief executive officer of something. My name is Mesela. I'm committed to make South Africa work. I have one green passport. They refuse to give me diplomatic passport. I'd like to talk also about engineers. Somebody asked me that if you were to go into Transnet today, what would you do? I say, I'll put my feet up and call all the engineers because they know where the problem is and they know how to solve the problem. It doesn't matter who is in leadership, but you need leaders that listen. If I don't know how to do something, Mesela, be honest with yourself. Reach out to Prof, reach out to people that know and admit that I do not know. And it's a sin anyway to know everything. So when I don't know as a leader that comes into any state-owned entity with a decorated MBA and beautiful power slides, that's not the engineering business. We work. We can I say we make shit happen? We make things work, you know? By the time I left the galvanizer, I could look at a bolt and I will tell you that what size is it and if the thread is right or left and the bolt that goes in there. I did galvanizing for the clips for the railway track. I loved them. They had weight and they gave us a good margins profits. And so when you go into this, when my life evolved, it changed my thinking. It changed that we can, yes, things are in a crisis, but being a visionary, seeing the bigger picture, seeing South Africa that has already led the continent, seeing South Africa that says that we're still going to lead the continent with our brothers and sisters. I am fortunate that I've got men, most of them, unlike Prof, they don't have hair. But I understand that it's because of the brain, they think a lot. And I want to talk also about investment and the cartridge, Tambo Springs. Entrepreneurship, we must arm entrepreneurs. We must make their lives easy because they are going to make our lives easy. And then who gets to shine? Us. If I put up my feet in that room and give the engineer a room to think, to solve problems, who gets the glory? The leadership, even if you know nothing. So we need to learn to do that and to respect investment. How long have you been going? Is it worth it? Is it necessary that when I go into a project, I take too long to get to the end stage where it really investment works? And if investment doesn't work, there are no jobs. And I've seen a number of universities out here, and they have a tendency to prepare graduates to be employees. We need to change that. We need to have graduates that are entrepreneurs that solve problems of this country, that solve problems of where they are, that can identify opportunities. I'm not working for a non-profit company because I'm not employable or there's nothing that I can sell. I can sell my husband, but it's here. It's saying something is not right in South Africa. It's saying that Mesela, how are you going to contribute in rebuilding South Africa? There was South Africa. There is a democratic South Africa. Now we have the real South Africa. What are we going to do? We've started on our side, and if you want to work with me, know that I am here and I work. If I have to work 7 days to resolve an issue, I will work 7 days to resolve an issue. That's the South Africa that we want, not the 824. And with the policy, we are guided by Professor, we are guided by business, we are guided by many other people. But at the end of the day, it must be implementable. If it's not implementable, if you can buy all the ingredients, but if you are not going to take your hands and work on the ingredients and try and cook this potjiekos that is going to taste very nice, that is the melting pot of black and white, yellow, green, pink South Africans, to ensure that the crisis, we take advantage of it and we turn things around like the resilient South Africans that we are. So let's put life into that policy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just so that we don't get into any refund of Lobola negotiations going forward, Mesela Kope Nhlapo, thank you very much for those informed insights. So I think before I come to our final panelist, I would be failing in my responsibility and duty, an esteemed one at that, as the moderator of today's session, if I didn't pose some questions off the back of what Mesela said as well. So Mesela, you spoke of, or your presentation had an engineering undertone to it, where the pieces of the puzzle need to fit and you need to harness expertise. Ultimately, it is leaders that have to make a decision. I think the greatest injustice can be indecision. Make a decision, and whether it's right or wrong, time will tell, but make a decision. And so I'll start with you, Prof, and then I'll come to Mesela before we get to our third panelist. Prof, you've given us hope for the future, as introduced, and your presentation looked at some stats. If I recall correctly, we're sitting at around 446 billion ton kilometers in terms of the designed capacity, but the demonstrated capacity tells a very different picture. And so the question to you, Prof, is what is needed to experience the paradigm shift from the demonstrated as-is capacity, very limited, to the limitless design capacity that SA Inc. has on offer?
I think it's actually, in a practical terms, very easy. So I say to many people, if I compare the Transnet problem to Eskom, it is just as bad, if not worse, than Eskom. We just don't see it. We don't see all the lost jobs. We don't see all the lost opportunities, all the lost money to our fiscus, etc. It's just as bad, but it's much easier to solve because it requires the restructuring of Transnet. There's no doubt about it, and we have to do it as fast as possible. It requires the infrastructure manager not to be part of Transnet. We've got a proven business model in SANRAL. SANRAL works. We all disagree about funding, but we all have national roads that work. It's as simple as that. If we can create that, and we can do that quite quickly, and then refund and rehabilitate this network, I think in the region of 60 to 100 billion rand, which in the greater scheme of things is not a lot of money compared to the money that went into Eskom. We can find that money. We know where it can come from. And then we can establish a private sector. Well, we already have an established private sector rail business that can access this. The people are ready. I know many of these people. They run trains right through Africa. They know how to run trains. So it can be done. So all of this is actually quite easy to do. Fix the network. Get a infrastructure manager that is not a part of Transnet. Get the regulation going, and we are there. Get the Rail Act passed. Everything is actually lying in front of us. Looks to me like a few easy steps.
So I think, colleagues, we find ourselves situated in the mother city, and I do believe that in terms of a new birth has been experienced. Evidently, Prof, from what you've said, in preparation for today's session, I undertook some moderate desktop research, and I came across an article that was published in News 24. And Prof, you were quoted as saying that at the time, many of you would remember, Transnet was in a very dire situation, and it was a morbid experience for all of us when our country's ports came to a standstill. And many of you would recall the time as the Transnet strike. But business worked behind the scenes with government to avert the losses to the economy. And my esteemed colleague, Mr. Jacob van Rensburg, often reminds us that the supply chain is the heartbeat of the economy. Just as the heart pumps blood to the rest of the body and sustains livelihood, so too does the supply chain sustain the economy of SA Inc. And so it leads me to the next question. Obviously, the statement that you made was in the context of the time that it was made. We now see the reduction of load shedding as an example, but that's because of the men and women that are working behind the scenes to realize this. And on that note, Mesela, I'm going to come to you. In terms of being a chief visionary officer and off the back of your insights shared here today, what would you detail as those implementable solutions? Because when we walk out from here, we want to walk forward and we want to walk progressively into the new reality for SA Inc. So in terms of implementable solutions, what does it look like and how do we get there?
Thank you for the question. The implementable solutions, we go back to the policy. Like I said, that the policy is not perfect. The policy says that government will fund infrastructure and companies will fund rail rolling stock. So we find ourselves where government does not have money, or rather it has a competing interest of the little that we have. So the only way to get the trains moving within 3 months, somebody said 3 months, and I'm sure they did not commit themselves to say from when. And we need to put in concessions running as of yesterday. How is it going to be done? We've always have a bag full of tricks, but concession is the way to go to get the trains running again and investment to flow into the country and those jobs to be created. So creative thinking, that's all that is needed. Let's just expand our thinking.
Thank you very much, Mesela, for that detailed response. Just as we require DOT, DPE, and DOL as an example to work in synchronicity, you've got ARIA, you've got academia, and you've got business on stage who sitting side by side, walking the journey together. And we're going to do something special here at the end of the panel discussion. But before which, let me introduce our final panelist, an accomplished entrepreneur, and one that has audit experience is always a lethal combination. Chairman of the recently established Multimodal Inland Port Association, and indeed an individual that had the foresight to create the backup port operation in Cato Ridge, and I believe expanding to the rest of SA Inc. as well. Not many people had that forward thinking, and many people said a backup port operation would fail. Contrary, it's actually thriving, and thriving very well at that. Ladies and gentlemen, my esteemed honor and privilege to introduce my fellow countryman, Mr. Warwick Lord.
It feels weird to come up here in the cold and rain after the beautiful weather we're having in Natal at the moment, but thank you. Firstly, to the delegates, thank you for choosing this session as opposed to a whole bunch of others or that session next door. And thanks to my esteemed fellow panelists. You've set the scene. It's quite difficult to write a speech. Now that you guys have said everything, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say up here. But South Africa has many challenges, and sort of specifically in its rail sector. Addressing them requires a multi-year, multi-stakeholder effort with a sustained commitment from government, private sector, and civil society. Collaboration, long-term planning, and consistent implementation of policies will be crucial for achieving sustainable improvements in this country's rail system. That's quite a mouthful, and I had to read it, otherwise I'm going to paraphrase it incorrectly. But it shows the journey that has been walked by some of the colleagues on the stage so far, or not some, all of the colleagues on the stage so far, is this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something, we didn't get into this mess overnight, and it's not going to take overnight to turn it around. Some of the challenges that we're looking at in the rail sector that have been highlighted, and so I'm going to be quite quick because I would like to get into the panel discussion with the rest of the colleagues. Infrastructure investment has seriously been lacking. Private sector participation in rail has not been where it should be. Transnet have had the monopoly on both the ports and rail. Regulatory framework have not kept pace with where they should be. And specifically, our rail at the moment, some of the policies surrounding it are not conducive to the way rail should be working. Specifically, trains chasing boat stack dates. That's not the way a train operating system should work. They should leave when they fall. Next one is intermodal integration. We spoke about many times of having road to rail, and that's the way to go. How, guys? There needs to be a transfer facility for this to happen. You know, very simple, these intermodal terminals are required where you can have truck and road interfaces, rail and road interfaces. Next one is skills development. We are seriously lacking in skills, especially on the rail front. Just my personal example at the moment is as we've taken over some of the Transnet services in the Cato Ridge inland port area, it's amazing to try and find the disjointed nature of the individuals that you're speaking to and how siloed everything is. Guys are experts in their line of thinking. However, jump across the page and all of a sudden there's nothing there. The next one is market liberalization. At the moment, we've had a monopoly for a significant period of time, and it is now time to open that. And then stakeholder engagement. This is the critical component, and I'd like to thank Mesela specifically and ARIA for their stakeholder engagement that they've been doing, as well as SARS and SAPICS, and bringing this to all of us. Guys, unless we're prepared to put our shoulder to the wheel and get involved, this is not going to change. So the sort of theme of my discussion today would be, guys, it's time for and. It's not or. This or that or that. It's time for this and that. And you need to ask yourself, what are you guys doing, and what are you and doing? You know, so I'm doing this, and? It's time now that we put our shoulder to the wheel, and I'm very concerned with regards to the sort of status and the questions, even amongst ourselves, that we turn around and go, Ian, when are you fixing the rail? No, guys, it's all of our obligations in order to get involved. So that brings me to my passion, and like it got said, I'm an accountant by background who then became a property developer who's now in the supply chain, so I am officially very confused. But be careful because I can audit you, so watch out. Dry ports are the inland ports or intermodal terminals of this integration facility that's required. You know, we don't have them at the moment, and we're wondering why our road is as burdened as it is with congestion, etc. We need to enhance connectivity. Dry ports act as intermediaries between the seaports and inland destinations and allow for consolidation. Locating dry ports improve connectivity in the ports and rail networks. We also have the ability to decongest seaports. I suppose I do have a presentation I'm supposed to be following along. Apologies, guys, we'll play catch-up now. My fellow speakers were so good speaking off the cuff, I thought I'd try the same, but I'm not as proficient, clearly. Some of the key rail policy considerations that I skimmed over simply because the colleagues have covered that in the past are these: safety, security, market liberalization. That should be private sector participation, apologies. What I wanted to do is I wanted to have a quick chat in the 1 minute that I've got remaining. I see we've got 4 minutes left, apologies guys, is to take you through the back of port operations as a way to really enhance the dry ports, inland ports, in order to decongest the ports. I'm specifically using the Cato Ridge example as that's near and dear to my heart, in order to showcase how it works. Currently, Durban Port is where we have significant congestion, specifically on the road front. At the moment, it's like all of us trying to get through a single door at the same time instead of using that door, the door behind here, this door, and that's what we now have to do. So it's very simply saying, guys, road can still obviously has to play its portion. However, there needs to be mass evacuation of containers to backup port facilities to now allow for the fluid movement of the supply chain. At the moment, the door is pretty much shut in the Durban Port, and I understand the Cape Port is pretty similar. We now need to be utilizing all of these. So you can have a look. This is the Durban Port Master Plan, talks to the backup port expansion, and critical to be able to move from the 2.5 million TEUs to the 10 million TEUs. Colleagues, I'm not going to go through the integrating technology, IA, and robotics. It was covered in the previous session a lot more eloquently than I can. However, that's a key consideration to improving our viability as well as the efficiency. If you can have the infrastructure as well as the policy guidelines, and then you have the AI coming into it, you have a very powerful combination of factors. My slides will be available, so please feel free to download them, and they will be showcased. I'd like to end here simply to have time to speak, and I'd like to just leave with the thoughts, it's now time for us to put our shoulder to the wheel. There's no more time, and it's up to you and you and you, not let someone else. It's up to us now to do this. I'd like to thank you for your time and look forward to the conversation. Thank you. 6.5.
Excellent. I see definitely an audit profession. He timed himself 6 minutes, 34 seconds, and 24 milliseconds. But on that note, colleagues, and I'm being mindful of time as well, we need to wrap up the session, but I'm going to allow you to engage. Paragraph 6.3 of the white paper states, and I quote, that the vision is to have rail as the backbone of South Africa's transport, SA Inc.'s transport economy by 2050. I'm no mathematician, but that gives us just a little over 17 years, or a little under 17 years from now. So we look forward to the journey ahead, those 6 weeks milestones that Mkhulisi spoke of earlier, taking us ever so closer to the 17-year end objective. But ultimately, if it is to be, it is up to us. It's now time for action. It's time for each of us in this room to go back to our designations as leaders, as managers, as operators, and ask ourselves, what needs to be done by me as an individual for my organization to dovetail to this reality. Rapid fire round, we're going to allow the roaming mic to go around, questions from our esteemed audience to allow you the opportunity to engage with our panelists. On that note, again, can I just ask that our panelists rise, because I'm sure all of you are probably thinking it, and I'm going to say it, abusing the privilege of being the moderator, it is now time for action on the back of what Warwick has said. So let's join hands, because we need government departments to join hands. We also need the private sector to join hands. And ladies and gentlemen, a moment in history. For the first time that we have, and I must say, it's about putting differences aside. It's about being considerate about the next person. So Warwick rushed through his presentation because he realized, let's get value from the session, and that's it. Let's work convergently. And again, something has been born in the mother city today. I'm sure you would agree. On that note, colleagues, roaming mic going around. I'm sure we have some questions for our panel. Okay, we have a question from Mr. Stephen Siegel. So mic to the front, please. Maybe let me just grab. Question answer.
Okay, thank you, Devin. So I think more than a question, I think I'd just like to make a statement. I think it's very encouraging to see what you, Professor, are doing, what Mesela is doing, what Warwick is doing. I think what is important, though, is by when this is going to happen, because the consequence of this whole problem on rail is causing huge problems in the Durban port. There's just not enough capacity to allow road transport to come in and collect the containers. And, of course, it's affecting the Durban-Johannesburg road. The road is, besides all the potholes, is certainly deteriorating from the size of these trucks that are running on these roads. And it's even become dangerous to travel that road. There's an accident every single night on that highway. So I think it's more by when is this going to happen. I know, Mesela, you said 3 months, and you qualified that by saying 3 months from when. But I think that's what we really want to know.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen.
We often think, and things that happened to us in the past, we think our president maybe he can move a little bit faster, you know what I mean. But he promised this crisis committee in April. The crisis committee is in place. The first meeting has already happened. The problem we had up to now is with Transnet, there's this war rooms that was created between Transnet and business, but there was no place of escalation. Transnet didn't want to agree on something, it just didn't happen. This crisis committee now provides that, and the president is insisting in a meeting every 6 weeks to get feedback. So I think if the rhythm begins, one of the 6 work streams of the LCC is the immediate fixing of problems. The immediate fixing of problems. So I have hope that we're going to start with that right now. And if something that could have been fixed in the next 6 weeks doesn't happen, that it will go to the president. And I think then we'll know when he does anything about it. I believe he is going to.
Okay, times. I think that's all we have time for. Sorry, it's a hard stop. But there is a gentleman. So yeah, so I think, guys, let's engage after the session as well, so that we can take the discussion.
of the CEOs was Portia Barnum. And
Sure. Thanks for that, Baz. Can I take, Mkhalisi, your question? I know we are pressed for time, but I think it's such a value-unlocking session, an impactful session. It's not often that you'll find three of esteemed panelists sitting next to each other in the same room. So, Mkhalisi, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Amongst the three that are sitting there, all of them are actually part of this team. The prof is there, part of this crisis committee. Mesela may not know, I think she does know. We've just actually pulled her into the business side of the committee, working directly with myself and also Ian. And over the world, well, you know what you are doing, we want it to be done right through, okay? So what I have done is ask my team to find all these very critical projects which have been unable to find a space and an opportunity to be delivered. And in some instances, we've even sat on Friday with the DPE ministry around Transnet, already trying to say what needs to be done there to bring them into the table. Because ideally, and what is going to happen is that Transnet executives will be leading some of those work streams themselves, as the way we've done it with Eskom. So that's where the accountability is also going to come from. I just want to give you that assurance that at the end of the day, we are going to be all collectively, but I'm already seeing the team there, which I'm very happy with. So welcome team.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mkhalisi. As we wrap up today's session, final words is that the transfer facilities support not just rail, but road and ocean as well. And this team, whilst focusing on rail, also supports multimodal optimization for SA Inc. So not the dream team, the realization team. Thank you once more.